In this video, I want to talk to you guys about the concept of standardizing the location of certain pieces of gear or equipment. So I'm going to talk about medical equipment, and I'm going to break it down into two parts, but I'm also going to talk about sensitive items. So, first off, I believe that standardizing the location of medical items in most anything, especially if you're a trained unit and you train with each other a lot, it just does not make sense. And therefore, I think that militias trying to copy that, it could be good, but it is only good if you're definitely not training together. And it will go to show that you don't train with each other if you are standardizing certain pieces of equipment. So when it comes to medical stuff, there was a comment in my last video about how Ranger Battalion standardizes the location of their IFAKs or what have you, or tourniquets or whatever. Well, my response to that is that, Ranger Battalion, and a lot of other units that are trained will still standardize certain things. They did it in the Marine Corps, and they did it, in other special units, and obviously Ranger Battalion is included in this. Standardizing the location of an IFAK for a unit that, in its selection program, requires people to be TCCC qualified, thereby being combat lifesavers, and being familiar with those medical implements, it kind of spits in the face of their training. It's just somebody trying to put a stamp on things, but they're doing it under the guise of simplicity. Well, it's going to be easy to find it. Well, no, it doesn't really make much of a difference, because the idea of using the IFAK is, only really going to be good for, periods where you're not under fire. If you look at the care under fire phase, the IFAK is not really going to come into place until after, the triage is actually important. Now, yes, you're going to have to open it up and get those items out in order to find them, but typically a triage is going to be required in order to, find out what's actually needed out of that. Now, a tourniquet is going to be needed pretty much immediately if that person's not able to help you give them treatment, and that's part of the care under fire phase. Is until you actually get good suppression, or that person is able to get to cover, or you're able to get them to cover, that person needs to apply their own tourniquet, and that's the only thing you're going to do under immediate fire. Understanding where those tourniquets are located is going to be very vital, but it's going to be pretty obvious if they've had any training at all on medical stuff and they've had to actually practice these drills. Then it's going to be pretty obvious where that tourniquet is, because especially if you're wearing body armor, there's not very many places that you can conceal a tourniquet, and then not many places you're going to want to conceal a tourniquet if you actually take your medical training seriously, and the understanding that you're going to need a tourniquet within like 45 seconds, or you're going to be too far gone with arterial bleeding. So, when you have the training, it standardizes itself, so to speak. You're going to want to be able to perform those roles, and therefore gear is going to be placed where it's functional for you. And some people, I've seen people put IFAKs on their back and stuff like that before combat lifesaver was a thing, and it wasn't until people actually started getting combat lifesaver training that they started, becoming center-lined and stuff like that. But you'd have certain squads and stuff like that standardizing having a tourniquet right here. Well, those people had no range of motion, like they couldn't actually reach it. But as long as it's all in the same location, everybody's going to be a little bit different, so you're going to actually have to drill that and get it to where they can reach it, not just where somebody can find it in the dark. But, even in the dark, it's not going to be too hard to find items like that, especially if you train during the day with each other. Now, standardization, as I said, is great for people that have no training. And it's great for units that are working with a bunch of people that are not trained, and that could be a good thing. But units that are highly trained, like Ranger Battalion or militias or whatever that are training together, they don't need to really be standardizing equipment. It doesn't really make much sense. Now, let's go ahead and talk about sensitive items. Sensitive items in the military would be anything like a map overlay. Pretty much anything on your body is sensitive, and even your body itself. You don't want anything going into enemy hands, not even a little piece of MRE or whatever. with that said, as far as a militia is concerned, any kind of orders and everything else need to be not only minimized in the sense that only the fewest people are carrying stuff like that. Anything that you think could give information to the enemy, whether they understand like the size of your unit or, you know, the name of anybody in your unit, that would be a sensitive item. So anything that would kind of tell you the role of the unit or anything could be considered a sensitive item. Thereby, your whole body, kind of like the military, could be considered a sensitive item. Now, there's things that are more sensitive than others, like having like a map and overlays and like orders and stuff like that. Maybe special equipment that you had captured that you were planning on using, that could be considered a sensitive item. Like mission essential gear could tell any kind of field intel analyst exactly what you were planning if they took you out. So those are the types of things you would want to get off of somebody and collect off of a body if you had the opportunity. And like for us in the infantry back in my day, we were taught not only how to talk on radios in infantry school, we were also taught how to change frequencies, but also zero them out in case there was a risk of the radio being captured, so they couldn't listen in on encrypted frequencies. So we would do the best we could to deny information to the enemy as much as possible and mitigate that information transfer to the enemy. And that's really where you're going to have to be briefing people before a patrol, before an operation, so they actually understand where things are and what the procedure is in order to mitigate information transfer to the enemy. So that really goes down to basic operations anyways, because the whole concept is surprise and denial of information to the enemy. So that's really going to be the core of your operations anyways. So a trained unit is going to know where you typically will carry things or where you could carry things because they're working with you, right? But night or day, they can find things off of your body if something happens to you. But if you're lucid, you can still help by getting those off and transferring those things to somebody for safekeeping. So there's not very many good reasons to have standardization of equipment. I can see that there might be reasons for it, but they're not really well justified in a trained unit. It actually does inhibit their ability to be initiative-based and maximize their capabilities. So forcing somebody to have a tourniquet right here could inhibit their their method of shouldering a rifle, and thereby they have to change the way they do it. It could also cause things to be snagged or whatever, or standardizing a tourniquet here, and they don't have the good range of motion to actually reach it in time, or they can't actually reach it here, then they can't provide self-aid. They need to put it where it works for them, and then it needs to be drilled, and it needs to be tested, and it needs to be war-gamed, right? So that's really what is essential. Standardization is not needed for somebody who's trained and actually taken it seriously. It's more essential for units and people that lack the training. Now, when we're talking about individual placement, like your loadout requires you to standardize stuff because it's just more convenient for you, that's a totally different story. We're talking about unit standardization, like entire units standardizing locations and stuff regardless of their own little quirks and capabilities. So anyways, hope this was at least a somewhat interesting video for you. But anyways, let me know what you think about this in the comments below, and you guys have a good one.